Welcome to Yelling Into the Void, a podcast discussing and exploring topics in World of Warcraft. I'm Tevin. I'm here with Scott as always. Scott, the dragons are invading. Well,
No.
I'm not sure what we should do. What do you think we should do?
Kill them. Kill them all.
I don't think we should kill them.
Oh.
What about become them?
No. I refuse. I will not do it.
Why not?
In fact, I am protesting. Right, consider this my formal protest. I don't want to join your group. It's a protest podcast right now. That's what we're doing. We're protesting everything. We're protesting.
I hate to break it to you, but I already joined the dragon team. So
Fuck.
My warlock is now a dragon. So we already lost that protest.
I mean, look, I hate how the dragons look, and I hate the everything about the transmog shit. But if the class I was playing could be a dragon, I would do that too, because it's too good.
Well, so today is the 22nd. And today's the 20th anniversary patch for WoW. It's the 11.0.5 patch and the 20th anniversary event patch.
Oh my god. We're so old.
The game's so old.
I'm old.
This brings with it a whole slew of changes. Like an absolute ton of things are coming into the game.
Yeah.
We talked about it already. Dracthyr can be other classes other than Evoker.
Huge.
Which it's going to be like ingrained in my head every time I see a dragon. I'm going to call them an Evoker instead of a Dracthyr.
Mm-hmm.
That's just going to happen. I don't know how to stop it. The other thing that comes out with all of this kind of like anniversary stuff is like an anniversary event, which also brings like a ton of other anniversary shit with it. We get a new raid to get some gear in. We get Gates of AQ40 event, essentially. I don't think it's quite the AQ40 event, but it's something similar to it.
It's like a scenario, I think. It's just like a scenario you queue into.
Okay. It's not like an open world thing?
No, I don't think so.
Gotcha. Old world bosses are coming back. Like all of the old world bosses, like the dragons from vanilla and I can't remember his name, the guy that you killed in BC, the demon dude.
Yeah, starts with a K. Man, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm so old. My brain doesn't work anymore.
But all of those are coming back. Shah of whatever, the one that you killed, it's a world boss.
Some sort of emotion.
Classic timewalking is coming.
Mm-hmm.
New pets, mounts, transmog, all from this event. There's literal like celebration areas set up. I went in and I logged in and I went to one of them today, and they're huge.
Yeah.
They're like sprawling with a bunch of NPCs and everything. They're huge.
Yeah.
And then, just kind of tacked on at the end of all of this, huge class reworks and talent tree changes, new ascendance forms for shamans. Warbank works with crafting orders now, which is huge. I don't have to go buy things that I already had in my Warbank because I forgot about them. This patch, I just like, for a normal 0.5 patch, which are normally large, this is like very large.
It's a big patch. It's an exciting patch. I think everyone's really excited about it. Not too much to do in the type of the game that we like to really focus on, but I mean, you're right. There's a raid. That's fun. I didn't get to like watch anyone play today at all because I've been so busy. But it feels like the raid's probably pretty easy. But like, I think there might be some good trinkets in there. I went to the raid vendor and was like looking at the trinkets and stuff, and there was one tank trinket in there. I was like, ooh, interesting. So I wonder if there's going to be any really good gear that comes out of this that you actually want to run the raid to get.
It's funny because I was watching Yoda yesterday, and we'll get onto that later in the podcast, but he was saying all of the gear out of the raid is dog shit and keep doing what you're doing. But he's also known to be a fucking meme lord sometimes. So I don't know whether that's true or whether that's not true,
Yeah, like I am
honestly.
not a theory crafter. I am not a person that crunches these numbers. I just opened a menu and read some trinkets and said, "Oh, that sounds neat."
Well, it
Um,
very well might be because his guild was talking about doing like potential splits for some of the gear in this place.
oh my
So
god. Oh my god.
um but anyways, all of that aside, that's the like news. And I just feel like there's a ton of it to cover. And there's not a ton of outside of this news to really talk about. I guess
Mhm.
the only thing to really talk about is MDI time trials, which we actually got like our first real peek into what MDI time trials are, because there was a stream team that was actually streaming all of their practice runs and everything.
Yeah.
And that it was super eye opening. It's awesome. It's cool to see. I get why a lot of teams don't do it, but it was really cool to see. Team not no longer Dorkin, but I think Team Drogo or Drogo's
I think
team
it's
or
just called
something like
Drogo's
that.
team, yeah.
So, yeah, did you get to watch any of the time trials at all?
I watched a little bit of Drogo's team, because they were doing some early morning streams, and I just happened to be able to watch then, so I watched a little bit of that. It looked pretty interesting, the kind of stuff that they were doing. I mean, obviously, like you look at the times of these two keys, like the winning time for Necrotic Wake was by Perplexed, which was sub 10 minute, which is insane. And their City of Threads was just under 12 and a half minutes, which is also insane. Um, yeah, I mean, like the cool thing is like a dungeon like City of Threads, I think we're going to see a lot of crazy shit happening, like because there's a
Mhm.
lot of RP in that dungeon. Also, I think I read that on the tournament realm, City of Threads was like every time you reset the dungeon, it was a different location for the eyes. It wasn't like set for like the week or the during the time trial or anything. It was literally every dungeon it was different. I would assume in the MDI that will not be the case. I will assume in the MDI, at least the ones in the actual head-to-head competitions, they will both have the same seed, and so they'll have the same eye locations. I would hope so, because I think that will kind of drastically affect your time. I would assume like you look at what the best times in this time trial were probably the one that had the most advantageous RNG on the locations of the eyes. But I think they basically pull them all at the same time. By the way, they kill the one
Yeah,
eye at the
probably.
beginning, and then they spread out and activate all three at the same time and do some weird snapping tech to snap them to the tank. It's crazy, and look, it excites me. This is like what the MDI is fun for, right? Like you have low enough keys to where they can do truly degenerate shit, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I do wonder, what do you think about like how high key level are they going to actually do in this thing?
I honestly don't. So I'm kind of torn because, like, on one hand, I could see them wanting some of these Zalateth bargain affixes in there.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I feel like we've kind of drawn this line in the sand for like high keys versus low keys, and the MDI notoriously hasn't been like super high keys, but it
Yeah.
has been higher.
Yeah.
So I almost wonder if it's just going to be 12s. And if it's not going to be 12s, they did a time trial on a 10. I think the time trial's normally about what they run or a little bit below.
Hmm.
So that means like we're looking in the like 10, 11, 12 range, I think, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think maybe there'll be some 12s. I think that's the big choice, is whether it's going to be 11 or 12s, because it does bring in that new affix and get rid of the old ones. I think one thing the MDI was useful for in like this game was kind of also an advertisement for Mythic Plus. Like, yeah, a ridiculous advertisement that shows what nobody does in the game, but it also does show like these are the affixes and these are the dungeons, and like it's kind of this big ad for Mythic Plus. And so there's a part of me that goes, well, if they go 12 and above, then they've cut out the new affix system, and so that part of the ad for Mythic Plus thing just kind of goes away. So I do wonder if they end up doing that or not. I think it's going to be really interesting. I think it would be weird if the dungeons are all like 11s, because they usually like and correct me if I'm wrong, they're usually variable, right? Like
Mhm.
I might be thinking of TGP, but I think normally like the dungeons are of differing key levels, especially
Yeah,
between like the cups and the finals.
I
So
think it's plus. In the past, it's been like plus or minus 2 keystone levels.
yeah, yeah. So
Um,
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. It's going to be interesting. I think maybe perhaps the difficulty at them coming to a decision about exactly what they're going to do with this might shine a light on the fact that we have an overarching Mythic Plus problem. Maybe, but we'll get that and we'll get to that in a little bit.
Well, to jump into kind of the main stuff that I wanted to talk about, Scott, and I think we should just dive right in because there's a lot to cover today,
Sure.
not only from the 20th anniversary stuff, but also what we want to talk about later. Um, I think to really jump into this 11.0.5 discussion, let's just start off with the one that probably impacts us, what I would assume the most. Which is the Dracthyr race,
Yeah.
which is really funny to me that I think that this is something that impacts us the most because ultimately I don't I don't think that this is that like significant. I think for the classes that can be Dracthyr, uh, they could also be dwarf and they could be night elf. Um, so there's a wide range of these classes or a wide range of these races that are super good for Mythic Plus. And then these classes could also be mechanomes and orcs or whatever else is most beneficial for raid too. So really, I think that the big point of Dracthyr comes in the form of like fall damage negation and Poland negation, like on Ansarek,
Oh, you mean like
as
on
well
half the
as
fucking bosses in this raid? Yeah, totally.
as well as I think the other big thing is people forget that Dracthyr get mastery. Like one of their racials is just they get mastery.
Hmm.
And that varies obviously because mastery varies between what spec you play, but mastery is still very good for some classes.
Yeah.
So I think that the Dracthyr race with an extra knockback, having mastery, and then the ability to negate fall damage and like displacement mechanics is honestly shaping up to look very good.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially like if you're playing a class like Priest, I have yet to see the argument for why it does not make sense for one of the least mobile classes in the game to go to a race that just increases your mobility by not as much as it did before, but a pretty substantial amount still. Your run speed is still faster. It's still faster to just do like the kind of hover jump thing than it is than feathers. It's faster than feathers. So that plus like it's the class is going to move faster. The knockback negation, like yeah, it's a huge deal. I just want to say overall I like this. I like the idea of adding new classes to new races. I like this across the board. I think every race should get to play every class. I think, but with that, I also really believe that race should just be an aesthetic choice. That you shouldn't be pigeonholed into a certain race because the effect is really good. That the MDI or the Mythic Plus meta has basically just become dwarf or night elf for the last few seasons because Shadow Meld and Stoneform are so good is kind of lame. I don't like it. I want people to be able to play races that are fun to them. But I also do want the races to have some like I'm I'm contradicting myself here because I also think like things like the Dracthyr like glide is really cool and unique, and I wouldn't want to take that away from them. But yeah, I don't know. I think this is cool. This is good, but it highlights one of the problems with the whole race design for me right now.
I think the one thing that annoys me about this is that they gave them wing buffet instead of tail swipe. Like I would rather have a knock up than a knock back,
Yeah.
but hey, I'm not going to bitch too much. It's still additional CC that I didn't have access to before.
Well, did you hear the ironic thing about this? Is that as part of the changes that they made to these abilities, to nerf them for other classes, they also kind of nerfed it for evokers as well.
Yeah.
So I think I forget which one it is, but it used to be on like a 45-second cooldown, and for evokers, it's been nerfed to like 50 seconds. Not a huge deal, but like one of the things that mythic guilds were doing on Brood Twister was they were using evokers because they would have their knock for every single little broodling spawns to help control those. And now with this change, it's not up in time. So it's like they just made Brood Twister harder based on the most popular mythic strategy, which is just very funny. It's very funny as a person who's not pulling that boss and doesn't have to deal with that yet. I feel bad for guilds that were like close to killing it, and now they have to redo their strategy because their evoker knock strategy isn't quite as effective as it used to be. Very funny stuff.
Well, I guess as far as Dracthyr go, I forget exactly what all classes it is. It's the classes that literally every race could be. So
Yeah,
what is that? Warrior, rogue, hunter, priest, warlock,
mage.
mage.
Yeah.
Is that it? Those 6?
Yep.
So I do think the thought of a Dracthyr rogue just makes me laugh a little bit on the inside, like a sneaky dragon.
I mean, once they did Torin, like all bets are off, man. Everything goes. Everything goes, and everything should go. Like, every time I see like people whine about the lore implications of like an undead paladin, I'm like, shut up. It doesn't matter anymore. Like, I mean, this game has been out for 20 years, and the amount of time that has passed within the world of the game is more than that, right? So, like, yeah, I fully believe that like a night elf druid could have trained a human in the ways of druids in 40 years. Yeah, I believe that. So just say that. Done. Right? So
I
there's
still
like,
want night elf paladins.
yeah, I mean, and there are Knight of Paladins that exist in the game. Like there is one already. He exists. So this is all going to happen. Like the actual barrier to enter here is not a lore thing at all. It's just art. It's just the work to do the art and make the animations and things that might not exist right now. It's going to happen. It'll happen eventually. Everything will be everything, and we will enjoy it. And I will be fat humans on every single class.
The next thing, I guess, kind of going a little bit out of order as far as like things that are going to impact us the most, but talking about the classic time walking.
Hmm.
So I think that this is super cool. The only thing that I think is a little weird about it is it says classic time walking and we get dead mines, but it is cataclysm dead mines. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter. That seems a bit odd to me.
Yeah,
Um, I, I think this is cool though.
I mean, it's like all these dungeons have been forever changed, right? Like Zul'Farrak is one of them, but it's not technically the Zul'Farrak from the beginning of the game because they've made changes to like how certain bosses spawn and events like that. Like, like everything's different now.
Mhm.
Anyway. So yeah, I mean, is it truly the classic versions? No, but do we really want to run like classic dead mines? I've done it in classic. I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, actually having boss mechanics is kind of fun.
Yeah. Have you done any of these yet? I haven't done any of these yet.
I haven't touched them yet. I logged in, I looted my vault, and I did a few, I think 11, 10, 11 keys. So that's about all I've done.
Yeah, I haven't. Um, I assume they're not going to be that difficult. They'll be similar to other time walking events and be pretty easy, but fun to do some new dungeons or I guess some old dungeons that we haven't done in a long time.
So there is a couple of things to call out with this. Now, again, full disclaimer, I have not interacted with these yet. This is all secondhand knowledge from people who have talked to me since the patch is released and they have interacted with it. First thing is, to my knowledge, they have reduced the amount of XP you need to level, and or
Again?
the potentially, or maybe just the time walking are giving you a ton more XP than they used to, which time walking already gave a ton of XP. I don't know. People are saying that it is extremely fast to level through this system. So
Wow.
I don't know if that's due to reduced XP or additional XP, or maybe people are just like, oh, this is new and it's fun, so it's fast. I don't know. So again, this is all secondhand that I've gotten. Um, the other thing that I thought was super interesting, which a guild member told me about, I didn't know that this is how this was happening. You no longer get scaled down to the time walking dungeons. The dungeons get scaled up to you.
Interesting.
So your item level and numbers and everything are not getting squished. You're dealing the same amount of damage, just the mobs have an adequate amount of health for that now.
I think that's great. Do we know if this is just specific to this event, or is this how time walking is just going to work in the game from now on?
I don't know. Again, I didn't even know that it was going to be happening for this,
Yeah.
but he was saying that he was doing like 2 million damage on an opener and a boss. And obviously, that's like now's numbers. That
Yeah.
is not time walking numbers. So
No,
I
that's
thought that that was super cool.
That's very cool. That's the way it probably always should have been, because yeah, I mean, like, the time walking, it's a cool system. I like it. It's fun to kind of get to periodically revisit these old dungeons. It never feels good when you're just being artificially nerfed to fit with a dungeon. It's just like it should be the opposite way of this, and I agree with the choice. So I hope this is for all dungeons going forward. Um, that's really cool. I think and maybe they can tune up the difficulty a little bit that way too, because like one of the things about time walking is just the way their scaling down worked, is that even if you were scaled down to those numbers, it really didn't translate to like
Mm,
you being actual like someone at level 80 in full like 630 gear being scaled down is still just going to destroy everything just because of the way the
yeah.
scaling works. So perhaps this way they can tune, by scaling the stuff up, they can tune it a little bit better to be not a like not hard. I don't think the point of these is it to be hard, but be not as much of a pushover.
Yeah, I also think that this brings in another interesting discussion. I don't know how it's working. Again, I haven't interacted with it, but people used to have time walking sets of gear
Yeah.
with old pieces, old legendaries, shit like that. If this is how it is working, I think would break the old time walking sets people put together.
Yeah. Who would?
So that would be, I don't know how that works.
Is that a do we care about that? Like, I mean, I'm sure like maybe 6 people care about that, but like do
I
do
don't
do, do,
necessarily think it's bad.
do the royal we care about that? Sorry. Sorry, you can't have a whole set to run incredibly easy dungeons once every 2 months.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's bad, but it is something that people have like put time into doing. And so I wonder if that's going to cause any frustration because people have put the time in for this.
I mean, maybe it might, but like I don't know. That's the way this game works, right? Like
Yeah.
occasionally they phase stuff out and change stuff up, and the amount of time you uh, committed to something is no longer relevant. So
So, I guess in the same vein to jump on this because we're talking about time walking stuff, the BRD raid was added,
mhm.
which has what is it, 7 bosses, I think.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Um, and it has LFR normal and heroic difficulty, and it is meant for flex 10 to 15 man, which like what the actual hell are we doing? Why is it flex 10 to 15 man? Why is it not just flex rating as we know
Yeah.
it up to 30 people? But I don't know. Maybe it's hard to scale these mechanics. It doesn't make any sense to me. But for what it's worth, the raid looks cool. It's cool to go into BRD and have it be a completely new experience from what we're used to. And I mean, at least there is a flex option and you're not just locked into have to have 10 or have to have 15 people.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's the worst part about Mythic is you have to have X amount of people. And if you don't, get screwed. So
Yeah. I mean, it is a little frustrating that like if you were running a guild with 18, 19, 20 people or more, and everyone wants to do this, you're just going to have to tell people, sorry, you've got to sit, or sorry, you can't just, yeah. Like the thing about this is the way things work out too. It's like if these raids require 2 tanks, which I'm assuming they're going to, there is no raid group that exists that carries 4 tanks. Like maybe you have some bench tanks or some, but that just doesn't exist. So unless you just have a huge roster of people, yeah, this is going to be kind of a pain in the butt. I think that's a very that's a very specific problem that I don't think most people are going to actually come across. Like I was really worried about this when this was first announced, because our group had like 21, 22 people typically going to raid. That number went way down as soon as we got AOTC. So I think we're firmly in the 10 to 15 people range right now as we're starting to recruit for Mythic. So not worried about this for us, but I could see this being very annoying. And then I agree with you. There has to be some sort of design limitation, or maybe even system limitation. Maybe it's just like the way the zone was designed. Like they can't have more than the 15 people in it. I don't know. Like it just could be a size thing. Maybe you have like requirements on how big rooms have to be for a certain number of people. And none of this was designed for a raid map wise originally, because it was a 5-man dungeon. So I'm sure there's a reason for it. I'm sure it wasn't just someone woke up one morning and said 15.
The other thing that I think is interesting about this is I think so. I don't actually know how the gearing works in this, because I spent my time reading something else this afternoon rather than actually diving deep into BRD. But I know that a lot of the gearing and a lot of the gear acquisition through this event is through these like bronze tokens. Um, is the raid I'm assuming has drops as well, right?
My understanding is, and I'll caveat this with that I haven't read or run the raid yet. The raid drops a different currency, and that currency you turn into a vendor for gear. So I do not think the people in the raid drop actual gear themselves. I think it all drops a currency which is different from the currency that you need to buy the tier tokens. I believe it drops that as well. It drops the bronze celebration, whatever. But then it has a separate currency specific to just the raid that you turn into a vendor right outside the person that transports you into the raid, that has gear. So which is kind of cool, because then it's all deterministic, and then you don't have to like get screwed over because that you in this limited event you just didn't get the drop that you needed.
I like that as far as bad luck protection goes, but I do think that they should do both. Final Fantasy does this where it's like they drop gear, but they also drop you tokens that eventually allows you to buy the gear from the boss.
And
Um,
maybe they do. Again, I haven't run it. I just opened up the vendor and saw that they had gear for sale for tokens,
mhm.
and it seemed like the token cost was small enough to where I'd be surprised if it drops gear and gives you a token, because it just seems like that would be very, very quick. But I could be wrong. We'll find out when
Yeah,
we run it.
gotcha. Well, as far as BRD goes, that's about all I know about it, and I don't really want to deep dive into something I don't know a ton about. But who knows? Maybe we'll go through the same thing that we did for all the other raids at this point and dive over every boss,
I
because
mean,
I like doing that apparently.
yeah. So like, one of the fun parts of the game for me is like as raids are being tested and bosses are coming out and there's a lot of news and discussion around boss mechanics, I really like to dive into that and listen to people talk about the mechanics and kind of get a preview on what the things are going to do. First of all, I haven't done that for this raid. I don't know if anyone has done that for this raid. And that's fine, because I don't think this raid is designed to be hard. It's not, even the heroic version probably is still going to be relatively easy for like an AOTC guild. If you're clearing the raid on heroic, you're probably going to be able to go into this pretty easily. But like this is one of those rare opportunities we get where we can like how often do you play this game blind on anything? Because the answer for me
Yeah.
is never, absolutely never. So like I don't know, I just like the idea of just walking into this raid as a group with no idea what any of this shit's going to do, and just having a nostalgia trip through one of the most fun dungeons in the game, while also kind of smashing your head against mechanics. I don't know, that sounds pretty fun to me. So I think I'm like intentionally not seeking out information on these fights.
So the other thing that I was gonna say about this is I feel like in like they just like you said, it's not gonna be a struggle for an AOTC guild, but there's no way in hell that they can create a boss harder than Heroic Ansarek, right? Like Heroic Ansarek is not necessarily hard, but when we're talking about like final bosses, like Mythic Ansarek is the hardest boss they've ever created.
Mm-hmm.
And Heroic is just the mythic version minus a few things. So obviously that makes it so much easier, like significantly easier, miles easier. But heroic Ansarek is still not an easy fight.
No.
It takes a lot of coordination. So there's I have a hard time believing any way in hell that there would be a harder boss in this raid than heroic Ansarek.
Well, and I just don't think people want to prog on a temporary for fun raid. Like what is appropriate in my mind is like 5 to 8 pulls per boss.
Mhm.
Like enough to where like you need to see it, you need to learn it, you need to maybe briefly discuss strategy and then execute on it, but like you're not sitting there banging your head against anything. And like anything more than that, I think it gets stupid and frustrating. And that 5 to 8 might even be too much for that. Like maybe like the last few bosses. Um, I just don't think I don't think anyone wants that. I think there's people still progging at every difficulty level. There's still people progging on the tier raid, and so like having to split your time between that and this, I just don't think is good, and so I don't think they're gonna do it. So yeah, we'll see when we get into it, whenever that is. I'm not sure when we're gonna actually get to do it, but I would be very surprised if it was difficult at all.
I would love to see them do like playing around with different kinds of raid encounters here. Like kind of like maybe do a Final Fantasy style boss where it's like it's a dance that you have to master that's the same every single time you pull it or something like that.
Yeah,
I don't
no,
know. I don't think it'll really work that well in WoW, but it'd be a good opportunity to try something out.
yeah, I agree. I mean, it's kind of a low risk thing, like this is just a for fun raid. It's only going to be around for a certain amount of time. Um, the gear is fine, but not great, I guess. So yeah, like just kind of, you don't have to stress, you don't have to worry. There's no expectation here, so just have fun with it. I think it'd be good. Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
see.
So for class changes, kind of the next thing that came into this patch, we had a pretty severe or hefty overhaul for the paladin class tree,
Yeah.
which also brought in some other paladin changes. I think ultimately this is going to be interesting more than anything. I don't think that anything that they did was bad. I actually think that a lot of the changes that they made and a lot of the talents that they added to this tree were cool. There's a talent that you can take now where sacrifice just makes people, it removes and makes them immune to poison and disease effects. There's a talent you can take that lets you use bubble when you have forbearance on you. Forbearance now only lasts 20 seconds rather than 30
Hmm.
seconds. Like there are a lot of cool changes here. Um Ultimately, I think that this is going to be more geared towards prop paladins and maybe a little bit towards holy. I don't think that this is really impacting Ret a ton. Again, there are changes in here that are going to impact Ret. They're in the paladin class tree. But I think Ret came out of this pretty much unscathed. I think with like a 3% damage loss or something like that. But
Hmm.
that's cool to see. Um, One of the other reworks, I guess, kind of is Shaman. Shaman kind of got a rework. Um, Both Elemental and Enhance, I think, were touched in this. I don't know a ton about these reworks, but I know that they have boosted the value of mastery for Elemental Shamans again.
Yeah, let's
Um,
let's be clear here. Mastery between in a 24-hour period, mastery went from being elemental shaman's absolute worst stat to being their clearly best stat. So like if you crafted pieces, oops, sorry, you better recraft
the
them.
the reason for this is your earthquake now benefits from your mastery,
Yeah. Yeah.
which means if you cast earthquake, if you know what elemental shaman's mastery is, if you don't, it essentially has a chance to duplicate your spell casts, and that can duplicate multiple times. So you can cast one earthquake and get four, or one earthquake and get two. And this just absolutely skyrockets the more mastery that they have, to the point of like I saw a gif of a shaman doing their opener on the PTR, and then just the amount of shit on the ground, just like it's gonna get melee killed. They're not gonna be able to see what's under their fucking feet because there's so many earthquakes on the ground. Like it is bad, but also good and
Hmm.
cool to see.
Yeah, yeah.
So, are there any other major reworks I'm missing?
No, not really. I mean, there was some. They added some stuff to Resto Druid. They added a few new talents. They did some changes to Mistweaver. They now actually use Crackling Jade Lightning, which is pretty cool. It like procs a lot of healing when you use it. Fun stuff like that, but nothing huge like that. I mean, I think the prop paladin is probably the biggest thing that happened in this
Hmm.
patch, and it like propelled them probably to be the tank. It's probably going to be the meta now. It was doing a lot of damage in the Templar build, but it was very, very squishy. They buffed its survivability by a significant amount. It seems like it's going to be pretty good. And I agree with you. The class tree is good. The class tree is much more interesting. I think the class tree beforehand had a lot of weird things in it that was like just the X does more damage, just weird stuff
Hmm.
like that you kind of had to take. Um, but like just weird to be in a class tree, and they've removed a lot of that for some more fun, interesting stuff. I really like the lead the charge thing that they added, which makes every time you use Divine Steed, the cooldown of your friend's move it abilities goes down as well. I think that's pretty cool. Just fun stuff like that. And like I'm looking at this tree and I'm like, thank you so much. And then I go over and look at the Druid class tree and I'm like, what the fuck are we doing? How has this tree not changed yet? It's awful. It's completely awful. And I hope they're next on the class tree revamp.
So there were other changes that came in, and we can talk about them a little bit later. But there were just slight nerfs and buffs. Hunters also kind of got a hero talent rework
Yeah, yeah.
for Beast Mastery, which eh, it's a thing that I think that I am in favor of, but it took an active ability away from them, and made it a passive. It essentially just turns their, I think it's their kill shot into Black Arrow now, rather than actually having a Black Arrow button. Um,
Interesting.
which I don't know. Ultimately, I think it's good, and I think that BM has never been the complex class to play, so I don't really see a problem with making it not complex. Uh, I don't know how this interacts with marksman. That's the only thing I don't know.
I still think it's so weird that Dark Ranger is the BM. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. Like I think Dark Ranger and I'm like master of pets. Wait, no, I don't actually at all. It's so weird to me. But yeah, they completely redid that talent tree, which it seems like it's cool. I don't play Hunter, so I don't know, but good,
The
good
weirdest
for
thing
Hunters.
is that pack leader is not BM's go-to hero talent. Like that just screams beast mastery to
Yeah,
me.
yeah. This is
But
like this is like what we said way back in the day that like they had some really really good ideas for some and not so good ideas for other, and then they were kind of scrambling to make things work. It's weird. Some of these are
mhm.
really weird.
uh for things kind of other things in the point 0.5 patch that aren't, I guess, really well not documented, but not well known by you and I. Uh, I guess this one is, but new shaman forms. Um, I think that these are hilarious. I think it's the best way to put it. I think that there is a set of shaman forms that essentially just reminds me of the little like troll dolls from the 90s.
But they got rid of those, or they didn't get rid of them, but they're not the base ones. Like that's just a glyph you need to get to put it in. Like the ones that they upgraded to are different. Like what happened here is what happened to poor Ugly Sonic, and justice for Ugly Sonic, and justice for Ugly Shaman Ascensions. Like poor guys.
I love it. I love the like hair going everywhere.
It's
I think
great.
it's so
If
cool.
I ever play my shaman, I will immediately get the glyph for the crazy ones. Like because it's amazing. It's amazing looking.
The other one is like it's essentially the same model. I think it has a little bit more armor on it,
Yeah.
and then it has a helmet
Yeah.
on it instead. Like that's the difference
Well,
here.
and the textures are higher res, right? Like it was an old model that didn't look that great in the modern game. Like they needed to upgrade it. This was something shamans have been asking for a while. I just wish they had stuck with their first pass. Stop listening to player feedback. We don't know what we want. Give us ugly ascensions. Do it.
And then the last thing, which is this is what I was going to go into initially, but I forgot about shaman forms, world content and the event. I haven't interacted with this much at all. The one thing that I did do is I went and saw what the ketchup gear is looking like. It looks like the ketchup gear is champion track, which means it's
Nice.
upgradable to 619, which is actually good gear.
It's huge. Yeah.
Uh, Not something that I was expecting. It's nice to see that it isn't just veteran armor. Like it's actually usable and catalyzable pieces that you don't feel that bad about.
You could tell me I can play alts without having to do delves. Is that what you're telling me?
A little bit, yeah.
Hell
You
yeah.
just have to go grind world bosses and
Oh
time
fuck.
walking
Fuck.
dungeons. But the no, I mean honestly, we meme on it and we make fun of world content a lot. But I think from what I've seen so far of other people doing this and from the like release trailer, this looks very cool. It
Yeah.
brings all of the like nostalgia from the old bosses, old dungeons, old characters, and just kind of like shoves it in your face, which is really what you should be doing on a 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
Like bring back all the old nostalgia. It's great.
It's a celebration, and you're absolutely right. I did the 3 world bosses: the Fell Reaver, the Shah of whatever, and the um, guy from Lich King, the Vault of Archivon guy. I did them. They were world bosses, man. Like, there's nothing much to say about them. They were world bosses. Like, there were mechanics, but you could just ignore them because they're world bosses. Um, and this will never be my ideal like form of gameplay, but yeah, I mean, I think I really want to do the Anchorage event because that seems really interesting to me. That it is not just fly over to Scythelus and then you get to do it. It seems like it's a queued scenario thing, which is pretty exciting, and I hope it's fun and cool. Yeah, I'm into this. I'm into this. Like conceptually and on execution, it feels like this is a really cool thing that they've added to the game. I'm glad they went big with it. I'm glad they did a whole bunch of thing for people across the board. There's a PvP event. There's PvE stuff. There's new dungeons, new raids. Like it's all hitting the right notes. I think the one big complaint I saw was the amount of time it takes to get the currency to get the tier. We talked about this a little last week to get the tier 2 stuff. I feel like they lowered that. I didn't see a specific note about it, but I was looking at the tier 2 vendor and it looks like it takes 30 tokens for your first one. Um, I feel like you'll get that in the first week, whereas before they were saying you need to do 3 weeks of doing every single weekly event in order to get your first one, and then it discounts after that. I think they lowered that initial amount, and that means like you get your first one in the first week, which is what they should do. Like you should be able to get one a week, and then because again, it's for fun, it's for nostalgia. It's like
Mhm.
that's yeah. So I'm pretty impressed with what they've done here.
The Hunter tier 2 looks like shit though. Can we just agree on that? Like
Yeah,
it looks so bad.
yeah. I mean, it always kind of did, but they're just rezzing it up, just exposed even worse. It looks so bad. The monk, which they created a new one for this because there were no monks when there was tier 2. Uh, Quite possibly, in my humble opinion, might be the best designed monk set I've ever seen. It looks really good. I'm not currently playing monk. I might buy the monk one first, just because it looks really cool. Um, so I don't know. I'm definitely gonna get the ones for all the classes that I'm actively playing. But some of them look cool. I think the druid one I like. I liked tier 2 druid when it was low res. I think the upscaling works well on it. It looks pretty cool. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with these. Yeah, I agree with you though. Poor hunters, you look like a clown.
Dude, like you get the the Justicar set or Justiciar set, whatever it is for paladins, and you just compare that to the hunters, and you're like, what the fuck happened, man? Like, paladins are just over here looking phenomenal, and then there's shit, literal shit that a hunter's wearing.
Look,
It's
one
so
set was
bad.
designed on a Monday afternoon after a weekend's worth of rest. The other set was designed at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday when it was due at the end of the day. These things happen. We don't need to bring them back 20 years later, but we've done it.
Oh my god. The only other thing that I think that is worth calling out as far as things that you can get from this event, there's Twitch drops. Obviously, those have been going on for the last week or so now. I think maybe
Mhm.
even longer. Um, and then there is, believe it or not, as funny as this is, not only is it the 20th anniversary for World of Warcraft, but it is the 30th anniversary for the Warcraft franchise.
I'm so old.
So there is like I think they're back pieces, and there's ones for like humans, orcs, night elves, and undead because those are the four like pillar races or whatever that were in Warcraft, Warcraft 3, Warcraft 2. So
Back in my day, there were only two races.
orcs and humans.
Yeah, I mean, I very much remember playing Warcraft 30 years ago. My uncle came to visit us, and he had this game he wanted to show me called Warcraft, and I became immediately obsessed with it. And I was 9 years old, and now now 30 years have gone by, and here we are. I'm still playing this fucking game.
Well, on something that isn't going to make you feel quite so old, Scott, I said earlier in the podcast, I was watching Yoda yesterday, and he was first off, he was progging Mythic Ansarek, which fuck that fight. It is so nerfed and not even remotely close to what the World First Guilds did, but still fuck that fight. That looks so ungodly, unfun to prog right now that like dear Lord, I have so much respect for all of the guilds that are currently progging on Mythic Ansarek. But he afterwards, and maybe even before, I tuned into this stream when he was already progging. He's working on a manifesto, which I'll link to in the description of this video. And this Mythic Plus manifesto essentially is it's going over issues that are causing some of the protests that we've been seeing around Mythic Plus. And if you haven't seen these protests, clearly you don't browse Reddit. And I don't expect you to browse Reddit because no good sane person would do that to themselves. But it's been all over Reddit. I think that the European servers have had more kind of like outward protests about this than the North American servers have. Essentially, people are going into Group Finder and they're literally like titling their key like protest, and then into the description it's like we have to wait X amount of time for queues and blah 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 blah. And so instead of just taking this at face value and Yoda being like, yeah, Mythic Plus sucks, he's put together this whole kind of manifesto explaining like what are the problems, what are potential solutions, and what can we do to make this better rather than just like Blizzard shit, everything shit, fuck Mythic Plus, blah 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 blah. And I think that this is really constructive, and it's something that I wanted to make sure that we took time to actually appreciate and talk about on the podcast. So, is there anything that you want to throw in as far as like additional starter stuff, Scott?
Yes. This was a very good read, first of all, and it is very reassuring to see a lot of the things that he is pointing out. Here are things that you and I have talked about on this show before. It feels good that we're not just yelling into the void. That the void is yelling back a little bit at times. The other thing I have to say is two things can be true at the same time. The first thing is that there are some major problems in Mythic Plus that I think need addressing sooner rather than later. The second thing, though, is that these fucking protest keys are so stupid. It's so stupid to do this. It's so dumb, and it just cracks me up because I'm like, what are you doing? Nobody's gonna be like, this is a video game. You're not fighting for your civil rights. I literally remember this happened. I'm gonna date myself. This happened back when I was playing EverQuest back in the early 2000s, and like the warrior class in that game was in a really bad place because all they could do was tank basically, but like Shadow Knight tanks and Paladin tanks were just better than them. And I just remember like warriors trying to get together and like write like the warrior bill of rights, and I was just like, fucking knock it off, people. Like just don't play. Like if you're just like, it's so silly. um it's so stupid. I'm sorry, I'm laughing so much. It's so stupid. But yes, there are problems in Mythic Plus that need to be addressed. And I think Yoda did a very good job of breaking them all down. And yes, to pat ourselves on the back a little bit, a lot of this aligns with some of the things that you and I have been harping on the last few weeks. I do want to say before we dive into it, I've been listening to the past few episodes, and we've been very negative sounding about this game. And that happens at times when you've got some things that you aren't liking about where the game is going or where the game currently is. I just want to say overall before we get into this that I think this is a very good video game, and I am still enjoying it very much, even with the problems that my favorite system in the game has currently. I still like it a whole bunch. I like World of Warcraft. I think it's a good game. I think the class design, at least of the classes I've been playing in this expansion, has been top notch, and it's got a lot of good things going for it now. It also has some problems.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that these things are killing the game for me. I think that it is making Mythic Plus more frustrating for me
Mm-hmm.
because of the expectations that I've set for myself in the past
Sure.
from things that I have achieved. But I mean, ultimately, like at the end of the day, you're going to have struggles and you're going to have to overcome them. That's the fun part of the Mythic Plus system and, rating and everything in general
Mm-hmm.
that I keep coming back for in the first place. So I try to not get too worked up over this stuff, but
Sure.
I do want to call out problems when I see them.
Sure. Yeah.
But
So the
okay,
manifesto itself. Yeah, let's do it.
the first part of this is tank and healer shortages and why we might be seeing some tank and healer shortages. And I think that there's a lot of good points here. I do think that there are some things that we are going to disagree with a little bit in this section, but I think for the most part, he does a very good job of outlining kind of the general sentiment that a lot of people are feeling right now here.
Yeah.
Um, the first thing around this, and starting with tanks, is tank busters currently are feeling too punishing at the key levels that we currently have. I think that this is true, but I don't think that it is so punishing to where currently you're getting one shot in 11s. I think that the bigger issue that I see with this is, well, I don't know. I don't even think that's true. I think that both bosses and trash have extremely hard tank mechanics right now.
Yeah.
And that's causing a lot of problems because it isn't like you get to chill through trash or you get to chill through a boss and then you get to deal with these hard pulls. It's almost like hard pull after hard pull after hard pull after hard pull. I kind of feel like that might be leaning more towards what the issue might be here, not that one specific buster in and of itself is too punishing.
Yeah. So yeah, he Yoda is nice enough to go through and list all of the hardest hitting tank busters in Mythic Plus right now, and it's fun going down this list and just being like, "Yep, definitely, totally." Look, I think hard hitting tank abilities are part of playing tank. Like this is a thing you have to learn to deal with, and part of the skill expression of a tank is knowing how to rotate your cooldowns, when to hit your cooldowns, knowing what is survivable and what isn't, and getting to those situations where you never find yourself in a situation where you don't have a button for incoming damage. It's some of the things I struggle with sometimes because I'm just not as good at timing my stuff. But I like that's part of getting good at tank. So like I don't think the correct answer is just nerf these things. I do think there is a point though that one of the things this game does is like you don't know how much damage something is going to do to you until it happens. And this is a struggle on both the healer and tank perspective is like as you go up in keys, there's a threshold that happens where on this key level you did not need a cooldown or you did not need one of your strongest cooldowns to survive that hit, and then plus one key and suddenly you do. And it is very hard to know that without seeing it first. And the problem with being a tank is that to find that out, you basically have to die and then
Hmm.
go, oh, okay, I need a cooldown now. The problem is, if you're a tank and you die, your group's probably going to die. You're probably going to wipe. With the new affix about the time limit, that kind of snowballs and the key is dead. And it's a learning experience for you, but it's a learning experience for you that feels shitty and makes you not want to do it. And it's your fault. It's your fault. And yeah, I mean, this is the pressure that comes with being a tank, and it's a thing that not many players have wanted to do in it. But like, there's always been less tanks than other classes, right? Like, this has always been a thing. It's usually not a problem because you only need one of them per group or two of them per raid. Um, but this has always been true. I think their change to tanks at the beginning of this expansion was, in essence, like meant to nerf tanks a little bit, but also to push some of the survivability responsibility of tanks onto another class to kind of share the load, as it were. This has failed. This has failed fundamentally. It just has made tanks weaker, and so you just have to be even better. So like the skill requirement for a tank just varies greatly based on key level, and it's a tough world out there, and I completely understand why people don't want to do that. Like, I have not pugged very much this season, and it's partially because I don't get as much time to play, and when I do play, I'm usually playing with people in my group. But there have been times I've gotten on and nobody else is on, and I've like said, oh, I'll just run into a 10 and do that, and I hesitate before clicking join on these groups, because it's like, oh, it's a lot of responsibility on me with a bunch of random people I can't talk to that might know some stuff about the dungeon. It's gonna all be on me. It's all me. Do I really want to subject myself to this? And I'm a player that feels fairly confident in my skill level. Like, so someone that doesn't, someone that's just starting out, or someone that, I completely understand why people are terrified of this role right now.
Hmm. So I will kind of defer to you on a lot of the tank discussion around this, but the one thing that I do think that is important to call out, and like, while I don't necessarily agree that we need to just nerf tank busters altogether right now, um, maybe maybe we do a little bit. So like, they nerfed tanks survivability wise,
Mm-hmm.
so that healers have to worry about them more. But they nerfed their survivability, but didn't really nerf the damage that these busters are doing. They're doing more damage than they were before. And we're getting into a point where people are just getting one shot by abilities. And I don't think that that's necessarily healthy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's a lot better skill expression, in my opinion, to smooth damage intake rather than press a button or die as a tank. I think that, like, you should be judged on your ability to take damage consistently rather than survive one giant hit.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that that's the state that the game is currently in.
Yeah, well, and my problem with it is like they're just so inconsistent on how much these things do. Like, there are some tank busters out there that they hurt, but I'll be like on a same key level, they hurt, but I'll be okay if I miss time a cooldown usage or run out of a cooldown for this. So, like, I know it's coming up, and I've like got my health pot button ready because I know my health's about to drop down to 10%, but I won't die from the hit, and I can just hit a health pot and get right back up immediately. And then there are some that just kill you. And like, there's no, like, again, the only way to know that is to experience it. Like, a great
Yep.
example is the first boss in Dawnbreaker does something called Obsidian Beam. That's for everyone that has done that dungeon, that's the beams that shoot out in four directions and then rotate, and you have to dodge them or run with them as they move. What people that don't play tanks and healers don't know, possibly, is the first hit of that is a massive hit on the tank. Probably, I think, outside of the first boss of Stone Vault, um, the hardest hitting tank buster in the game right now. And the first boss in Stone Vault has a mechanic where you will be taking 50% less of that damage as long as you have a healer that dispels you timely. This does not have anything like that. It hits so hard, so hard, and I just was not expecting that. Like, I mean, you do like heroic and mythic versions of this dungeon, you don't even know it's a hit. The first time you walk into a key, you're like, oh yeah. I literally, the first time I walked into a 7 on this, like the first week of Mythic Plus, like, I died. I just died. And I was like, what killed me? Did I stand in the beam? I don't think I stood in the beam. And it's just like it hit. It hurts. Like I've done an 11 on this. I didn't time it, but I've done an 11 on this. And man, if you don't have one, maybe two cooldowns for that thing, you are just going to die. And yeah,
Mm.
the only way you can know that is by experience. The only way you can know that is by experiencing it at that key level. And so that basically says that you have to fail that key every single time to learn that. And that's not a huge deal. Like, I think it's okay for once you're getting 10 plus that like maybe the first time you try to run a key, you don't time it, you fail it. Like I think that's okay. But in this pug scene, people have no patience for that. No
Mhm.
patience. You will get flamed, you will get yelled at, you will be discouraged. People will whisper you after the key and tell you how fucking awful you are and you should quit this game. Like and people don't want to put up with that. I get that. I totally get that. And that's like we've talked about tanks a lot here, but I think healing has a very similar problem right now in that
Yeah.
just like the thing is, if you fuck up as a DPS, and I'm not like I want to be clear here, it's not saying that there is no pressure in this game for DPS players. There absolutely is. There's everyone in Mythic Plus has a lot of responsibilities, but like fucking up as a DPS is like fucking up your rotation, right? So you do a little bit less damage, and maybe like over the course of the key, you're not doing enough damage because your rotation isn't clean, and so you don't time the key. But that is like so much harder to detect and to feel than oh my tank got one shot because they didn't hit a button on time. Like it's just different. It's a psychologically and just emotionally it feels different. And so yeah, I mean like these two roles have always had a lot of the pressure. I personally think even still after playing tank, I personally think I feel more pressure as a healer than I do a tank. But I completely understand why there's a serious drought of people wanting to put themselves under that kind of pressure.
So I guess to carry on the discussion about pressure, this is a second thing that he kind of calls out in this manifesto, that there is pressure on the tank exactly like you are talking about now. But what people also don't realize and just kind of assume and take for granted is in a pug key, the tank is the de facto leader of the group.
Mm-hmm.
They are the ones doing the routing. They are the ones calling for lusts typically. They are the ones choosing what mobs you pull. Like they just kind of get defaulted to the leader position. And
Yeah,
not everybody has that like leader, like wanting to be a leader mentality. And that's
yeah.
hard for a lot of people to get over. And I think that adds to the pressure as well.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it certainly makes sense because the tank is the one pulling. So it kind of makes sense how we just kind of naturally went into this. Oh, the tank is the leader. The tank is the route decider. Like it makes sense. But yeah, that just like how do you learn that, right? Like this is the problem I have with both tanking and healing in this game is the only way to learn is by doing. Like one of the biggest frustrations I had being an early healer is that like okay, where do I go to like bone up on my healing skills? It's like, well, heroic dungeons, there's no damage. So not there.
Mhm.
Mythic zeros, there's no damage. So not there. Mythic plus, twos is a little bit of damage. Three is a little bit, four is a little bit of damage. And then eventually you just get to a point where it's like, oh wait, I have to actually like start healing for the first time ever, and it's on a high key where people are expecting to time it, and then suddenly I look like a piece of shit. And there's no way of prepping for that ahead of time. Like again with DPS, you can sit on a dummy and at least like get your rotation down, right? You can really get the muscle memory of your rotation in, and then you'll be able to execute that while doing the other things you're responsible for. You just can't really do that with healing or tanking. You just really can't. You have to go into the dungeon with the tank. You have to experience the dungeon. Like you can't even necessarily pull up the mythic dungeon tools route. Like you can go on the internet and grab someone's route and look at it ahead of time, but until you've actually done it, until you've actually gone through the route and seen the mobs and pulled them and seen like okay, this route I read wants me to pull these two groups together. How do I do that? How do I do that in a way that doesn't accidentally pull other things or groups them together efficiently and quickly? Like that is the type of stuff that you can only experience by doing. And if you're pugging, then like you have to go into a group that expects you to know what you're doing, but you don't, and nobody has any patience for that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I and the funny thing is about the patience is like people already didn't have patience, and now that they're having to wait extra long to get into keys, they have less patience.
Hmm.
So they're just becoming more assholes.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, but so okay, to talk about healers and tanks in this next part, I think that there is a very, very clear issue with balancing for tanks and healers. You
Hmm.
can go look at Raider IO right now, and you look at the top 50 keys timed. And sure, we're talking top 50. We're talking like 0.0000001%. But it is almost exclusively warrior tanks and shaman healers. There are some bears and there are some disc priests,
Hmm.
but it is almost exclusively warrior tanks, shaman healers. And I think that this balance, like this absolute chasm in balance, where it's like warrior is very clearly the best tank right now, followed by like maybe bear, I would say is probably second best.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you have Resto Shaman is very clearly above all other healers. It's like something like 80% of all time 12s has a Resto Shaman in it or higher. And then like Disc Priest, I guess, is the second best healer currently. But like it's not even close. Like if you look at Prot Paladin versus Prot Warrior and the number of keys that these tanks are doing, it's not even remotely close. Like at all. So if you're a Paladin one trick tank, you might just not tank this season, you know?
Well, not anymore though, because we're back, baby. But yes, yes, I think that it's interesting because I think you're right. I think the reason why warrior tank is so prevalent and the reason why shaman resto shaman is so prevalent are kind of different reasons. I think from a warrior perspective, we're talking about tank busters. The majority of these tank busters are physical, which warrior does a very, very, very good job against. The ones that aren't physical, warrior has a thing called spell reflect that reflects some of the hardest hitting tank busters, which is just not fair. Um, so that I think is one of the large reasons why this is such a prevalent tank right now. Bear is pretty good at a lot of these too, but man, let me tell you, you can feel the ones that Bear is not good at. Yeah, you can feel it. I wish I had a spell reflect because Jesus. Um, but from the healer side, I think the healers are actually in a fairly good place right now. I think Mistweaver output is very good. Holy Paladin is actually very good right now. Um, Priest is very good. Evoker, of course. The thing is, not only is Shaman just have the utility, but and no shade to my Shaman playing friends out there, Resto Shaman is also, as it is designed right now, just very easy relative to the other healers. Like the to hit maximal HPS output is not as complicated as it is for some of the other healers. So you are able to react very quickly and pump healing very, very fast, which is what you need for Mythic Plus. There's not a lot of setup required. There's no ramping or anything like that. You just throw shit down and burst, and that's what you do. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's kind of, in my opinion, why one of the reasons why shaman is so prevalent. And again, this is something I get because in a world where these two roles have so much pressure put on them, the classes that can do the role the easiest, um of course they're going to be the ones that people tend to gravitate towards.
Yeah. So I guess balance wise, like this is also becoming kind of a problem for DPS as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's the last thing he calls out in this whole manifesto in general. So we can circle back to this once we get to that part. But there class balance as a game is concerned, I think is very good right now.
Yeah.
Class balance specifically for Mythic Plus, I think is pretty rough currently.
Yeah.
Um, so I just want to make sure that that distinction is made because I don't think that the game balance wise currently is that out of whack when it comes to like DPSs and healers. But in Mythic Plus, especially doing the hardest content in a 5-man group where you are limited to the classes that you can bring, there is very clearly outliers in what is going to be the best. And so I think the Mythic Plus class balance is just what we're talking about is out of whack here.
Yeah, and that's so difficult to fix, right? Like this is this is why they've struggled so long with like PvP versus PvE balancing. Like it's so hard, and now they've got like just such different damage profiles that you need for these two types of PvE content. Especially this raid where there just wasn't a lot of AoE damage in the raid itself. There's a lot of single target and some cleave. Um, Man, I don't know how they solve this. I don't know how they do it, but I agree with you. I agree with you that Mythic Plus feels relatively balanced. I think what Yoda says in this manifesto is not balanced for season one of an expansion, right? Like
Yeah.
normally season one of an expansion is when you get the most balance because they've spent the most amount of development time on these classes and balancing them at max level, and then from there it kind of moves out of whack as they go, and then they have to adjust and nerf and yada yada yada. But for being the first season of expansion, it feels especially egregious. I agree with you.
hmm So the other thing that he calls out here, and we didn't really talk about this when we were talking about tank busters, but his proposed solution to tank busters is make them happen, make the damage from them be lessened, and make them happen more frequently, I think
Mm-hmm.
is what he actually says. Um, and he said that in doing that, you remove kind of the element of like all of your skill expression is can you survive a one shot or not?
Mm-hmm.
And so he wants to add back in some skill expression. And so currently, healers and tanks aren't really being looked at for their damage. And in the past, they have been.
Yeah.
And he's thinking that this might be an area in which you can bring that back in to see like what a good tank skill expression is. You know, like on warrior, for example, or on bear, like there are buttons that you can press that deal more damage than either shield block or ignore pain or iron fur. Now, not all builds are running, you know, the talents that make these buttons better than those,
Mm-hmm.
but there are buttons that you can press, and that could be the skill expression that we need added back in if they go down the route of his suggested changes. But currently, I think he calls out, he says that healers can, for the most part, AFK until healing intensive parts of the dungeon. And I don't disagree. I think that a lot of the damage that healers are doing currently is just passive damage. Like Disc Priest, for example, is just their healing rotation, is dealing
Mm-hmm.
all their damage. Evoker is essentially pressing fire breath and deep breath at the beginning of a pack and just allowing that damage to carry them through it. Shaman, Acid Rain is completely passive, especially with Surging Totem on Totemic and your Healing Rain being there for fucking ever. It's a lot of passive damage and not a lot of skill expression from the healer side. And on the tank side, uh, really all it is right now is you have tanks that are dealing damage through pressing their defensive mitigation buttons, which is normal for tanks like Paladin, where Shield of the Righteous is both your main damage ability, but also your active mitigation. But
Yeah.
for things like Bear, in the past, you had Raise. You have to actually press. Is Maul the spender? No, Maul's the generator. I
No,
don't remember the skill
Maul's the
target.
spender. Yeah.
Okay. And for warrior you had to press revenge, and so like you had to make conscious choices on whether do I spend rage on surviving or do I spend rage on dealing damage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's completely gone currently. Like it's almost always better for you to press uh have rage to press shield block and then press ignore pain on a
Yep.
warrior, or it's almost always better to press iron fur than pretty much anything else that isn't a free proc on a bear.
Correct.
um
Yeah.
so he wants to bring this skill expression back in through DPS.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely like specced very defensively on my bear right now. Like I'm taking probably like a 20% DPS loss by taking the more defensive talents that I have. Whereas like I'm not taking tooth and claw right now, which is a pretty big damage increase for Guardian, because I'm taking some other defensive stuff. So like I could find ways to eke out more damage if I wanted to at the risk of some survivability. And I kind of like that. I like that choice that you have to make as a tank, that like, how do I, is this a fight that I need to eke out more damage? Is this a key that I need to be maximally survivable, or can I risk some of my survivability for damage? I like that as a calculus that you have to make. I do. I'm uncertain if I want it really to be like the skill expression of a tank or a healer is how much DPS they do. Like
Mhm.
I don't want this to go like full Final Fantasy 14 where it's like you are a DPS class that also has some heal buttons that you hit in between your DPS abilities. Um,
Sure.
but I also like, I have never been the type of healer that is like just, if there's nothing to heal, I'm just sitting there, because I think that's it's boring. Like I've always been like a, where I enjoy like the mini game you're playing with yourself, certainly not playing with the rest of the group because your bar will never be as big as theirs, but like that you're playing with yourself, that is like, how much damage can I afford to eke out on this key? And it's like, I think it is good for the game when that does matter a little bit. Like I think it is bad when you don't need damage, like when a healer can do 0 DPS and you can perfectly time the key. I think that's bad, but I also don't want to go back to the full level of like the only meta healer we ever have is the one that happens to do the most damage, because we need that for timing of our keys. So I think there's a
Yeah.
sweet spot there. And I do like, I don't care ultimately about like DPS. If I cared a lot about doing a lot of damage, like I'd probably play a damage class. So like I don't think this is like the perfect solution to the problem. I do like want my damage to be high. Like when I look at my overall at the end of the key and I'm like, oh, I've done better than that. And I've seen other tanks that have gotten up higher than that. And I want to be able to do that. But I don't think that's like, that's kind of like a bonus. So, I mean, yeah, in your world where they decrease the damage of these busters, I might feel a little bit more comfortable specking into some more offensive talents, and also just
Mhm.
using my cooldowns, because a lot of the tank cooldowns in this game serve both offensively and defensively, right? Like for Bear, both Incarn and Rage of the Sleeper buff your offensive abilities at the same time as buffing your defensive ones. And so like in a world where I'm less worried about getting one shot, I'm just ripping those on cooldown to maximize my overall damage. But like on the keys that I've been doing, I really feel the need to hold them not too long, right? You don't want to waste the cooldown, but like if I'm on a boss with big tank busters, like I have to hold Rage of the Sleeper to have for one of those busters. I can't rip it.
Mhm.
Like uh, so there's stuff like that, and I don't know, I've kind of gone around in circles on this, but ultimately I think that is one way of solving the problem. I don't think it's the best way. This is the one
Yeah.
part of his manifesto that I was like, if we really want damage to come back to mattering that much, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, and ultimately, I think that the DPS argument for tanks and healers is one that is a touchy subject, because you have some healers out there who are like, I play a healer to heal, not to deal damage. And you have
I,
tanks out there who are like, I play a tank to tank, not deal damage. So
yeah.
I do think it's a touchy subject, but I ultimately think that you shouldn't just AFK if you have nothing else to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way I look at this is that like damage for both of those roles is a bonus. If I am selecting to play a tank, I want my skill expression, and the thing I want to get good at is survivability and aggro, I guess technically. The ability to group and hold and survive mobs. If I want to play healer, then I want my skill expression to come from how effectively and efficiently I can keep everyone alive. Um, I don't want the main goal of either of those specs to be how much damage can I output. It
Hmm.
can be a side thing, it can be a bonus thing, but I think that if you want to play a role whose main goal is to maximize damage output, then you should be playing one of the DPS classes.
Yeah. So I guess moving on, because we're already decently far into
Oh
the
my god, I
show's
just looked at the
runtime.
time. How did that happen?
Let's talk about something that you and I have talked about really ad nauseum at this point.
Hmm.
Not quite as ad nauseum as the next thing we're going to talk about, but the death timer is something he actually calls out, and it's nice to hear somebody who is a higher level player actually talk about this,
Yep.
because it's almost gone unrecognized or unrealized from higher level players. And I think that it is a very important thing to call out, that like before, dying was a problem, and now dying means the end of the key potentially. And like you can have a full wipe on a 10 and you can still time it. If you
Hmm.
have good enough DPS, if you play well enough, if you pull aggressively, that's still possible. But before, I think we were too far in the other direction where you could wipe 2, 3, 4 times and still time the key. But I do think that right now, as it is, and how punishing these dungeons are, a 15-second death timer on top of a walk back, on top of losing Spymaster stacks, on top of losing cooldowns or lust or everything like that, it is just too punishing, especially for a 7.
Yep. Totally agree.
Uh,
The clearest thing that they can do is just completely revert this change, or completely redesign the affix that comes in at 7. Just across the board, I think this is a failure of a design issue. It's so funny because we looked at this when it first came out and we were like, well, maybe this will make timers matter more. And the one thing we really felt coming out of Dragonflight is that we wish the timer mattered a little bit more. And this is not what we meant. This is not what we meant at all. And I just think like there is psychologically a big difference between you wipe and see that you've lost 90 seconds and know that the key's dead, and you've battled through the key the entire time. It's coming down to the wire and you just didn't quite have the DPS to get there in time. Like those two things feel completely different to me. So when I say that I want the timer to matter, what I mean is not, I don't want one mistake to have like overarching consequences. I want a efficient run where people are maximizing their DPS, maximizing their route, managing to eke out damage wherever they can, and pulls. I want that stuff to matter. I don't think
mhm.
just arbitrarily saying, "Up, you missed a kick, 15 seconds," or "Up, the tank died to a one shot that they never experienced before. Fuck you." Like I don't think this is the way to do it. I don't think this is the way to enforce timer difficulties. At all. So yeah, I think this is a failure. I mean, there are plenty of ways you could like do something similar to this and don't have it this. Like I think just having the affix be at 7+, you get X less minutes, like would essentially do the same thing, but psychologically would feel much different.
Yeah, I've always been in favor of like if they want to do something like this, just shorten the timer.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like I don't know that that's the best solution. I don't know what
It's
the best
probably
solution
not.
is for
Yeah.
this.
It's probably not the
Uh,
best solution, but I think it's a better one than death
yeah, it definitely
consequences.
feels less bad.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, get rid of it. Season 2, I want this affix gone. Let's hope.
I agree. I don't think that this affix is good at all. I did just notice that I missed something here, and I think that we should go back to chat about it because it is something that I think is important to call out as well.
Hmm.
And that is key levels. Key levels are very steep currently, going
Hmm.
from what used to be for example, if you went from a 5 to a 6 now, that is a bigger jump than going from a 15 to a 16 was in the past. And I think that that is weird, and I don't think that it's necessarily, I guess maybe 5 to 6 is a bad example. But like you have bigger key jumps in this expansion. 6 to 7 is a good example. 9 to 10 is another good example. And then the biggest one, and the one that we've talked about the most, is the 11 to 12 jump.
Yeah.
Like that is like an astronomically ridiculous high amount of increased difficulty based on what it was before. And I think that the one main thing to call out here is Yoda makes a point in this manifesto. And I think that it is something that needs to be stated if we want to talk about changing this. Is it is 100% possible to go way too overboard in going backwards on this. Like if we have 100 keystone levels, then we are going to have keystone levels at which people are not doing, and it's going to be harder to find groups for those levels. It's something that you and I have talked about in the past, where Blizzard wants to evenly spread out the population around keystone levels so that you can always find a group.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that it's too condensed right now, but I think that it is very easy to get into a situation to where it is too like wide open, too
Yeah.
way too many keystone levels. So
Yeah, I mean they dropped it by 10, but then they also didn't quite actually drop it by 10. Like it's really weird because I agree with this completely. I think one of the biggest problems is not even necessarily the jumps between keys and the increased difficulty there. I think that this is a side effect, but also just like it just doesn't feel like there is a as long of a progression path anymore. Like me, take me for example. Like I have timed just about everything on 10. I didn't get a necrotic wake. It's not because I couldn't do the key. I only attempted 110 wake and we stupidly died on the second boss and fucked us over. We were able to handle the third boss and the final boss just fine. We just ran out of time. So like I will time that this week probably. And I'm pretty confident in my ability to get every one of these done on 11. I am less confident in my ability as a relatively new tank that is new to the role and is still learning and still figuring out how and when to do stuff. I am less confident in my ability to do 12s. I'm going to try it. I don't know how it's going to go. We'll see. But like if that's true, it's a month into the season, 5 weeks into the season. I if that's the case, I'm effectively done. Like like I haven't even fully geared out my character yet, and I feel like I'm done. And I think one thing Yoda says in here is that like if you want to push high keys but are not a world first key pusher, hey, that's us. That's where we want to be. Then essentially you exist in a 3 key space. Your entire world in this game is 3 key levels, is 12 4 key levels, 12 to 15, and that's it. And that feels so tiny. That feels so small. That feels like such a limited path of progression. And it's just, it doesn't feel as fun. It just doesn't feel as fun to me than the feeling of working up and you're starting with a 2. And yeah, like, yes, it's true. Like 2 to 15 weren't hard, but it just felt like I'm progressing, I'm moving up. And as a new player that came into this game in Shadowlands, like those keys were hard for me at the time. Like the
mhm.
first time I healed a 2, that was difficult for me. And I learned and I got better and I moved up and like I felt this real sense of progression over the course of 20 key levels. And by the end of that season, I was timing 20s and it was so cool. And it's just there's less of that now. And because there's less of that now, it doesn't even matter if the scaling is the same. Like if the scaling from a 2 to a 10 is exactly the scaling from a 12 to a 20, which it is supposed to be, but then they added all these new affixes and fucked everything up. Like it's just less. It's just less now. And
Mhm.
I don't I'm not as excited about pushing because I look and I can see the end already. And
Yeah.
it's not as far away. And that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah, yeah, and I wholly agree with everything that you just said, and it's weird that people are getting to this point of having all 11s timed and then just becoming like overwhelmed with like anxiety of
Hmm.
going into a 12 just because of the sheer difficulty increase of it.
Yeah.
Um I don't think it's ever anything that we've seen in the past. I feel like people had anxiety around doing like 20s, but that was more so just because like I really want to time this. I really want to get Keystone Hero. I really want to get my portals, but not necessarily like I am scared of going into this key.
Yeah.
So it's concerning.
Yeah, it's so funny because I just didn't see any of this coming. Like when I first heard about the key squish, and I was like, oh, this is not going to affect me at all because like I wouldn't be doing keys from 2 to 10 anyway. So just making my key experience start at a 12 instead of at a 2, that's fine. I didn't see any of this other stuff coming, and in actual execution of that, it's not as good. Like,
Yep. Completely agree. Well, the next thing is something that we have 100% talked about ad nauseum. And again, I said it last week. It's pretty much the weekly explicit thing that we talk about at this point. But stops are actually called out in Yoda's manifesto, and I love seeing this
I was
because
so happy to
I
see this.
I feel like we have stated this over and over and over and over again. And we have like two camps of people that we've been hearing from who are like, oh, no, this isn't that big of a deal. And then we have the other people who are like in full agreement with us, like, what the fuck is going on here? And verbatim, Yoda says, I think that this should be reverted.
Hmm.
And then he says, if it's not reverted, what we should do is we should at least revert the change to the point where like stops used to work the way that they did. So I guess it's still reverting it, but then make the CD on AoE CC longer so that we don't get into a situation that we were in Dragonflight where it's you can keep a pack CC'd for 2 minutes straight and then just kill it without it doing anything.
Yeah.
I agree. The problem with this is I think that there I think we were trained throughout Dragonflight for 2 years. We played the game this way. And then they were like, okay, well, everybody's playing the game this way. Here's a ton more casters. Deal with them. And then they made this change to how stops work. And now we're just kind of screwed. So ultimately, I think this change needs to be reverted. If it's accompanied with a CC CD increase, I think that that's fine. But I think AoE stops should work.
Yeah, completely agree. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it sucks. It's not fun. It is in pugs, especially. It is just torture. The amount of time people overlap and fuck stuff up because of this change is just so frustrating and annoying. It should be changed. And yeah, I mean, nerf the shit out of AoE stops, please, 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 please. Increase the cooldown. Do whatever you need to do. I don't care. Just get rid of this change. Just make it so when I press a stop, it stops something. That's all I want.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, it is so refreshing to see Yoda say this. It's so refreshing. I'm telling you, like we've complained about this the last few weeks. Just seeing someone that is not playing at the level I'm playing at, that is playing well above the level I'm playing at, agree and look at what people are saying and look at what the experience is and say, yep, this is not good. It's so refreshing to see. So thank you, Yoda, for that. And please, Blizzard, please revert this thing. Nerf my in-cap roar. I don't care. Nerf the shit out of it. Just make it actually stop a cast. That's all I'm asking.
So we actually had a suggestion from one of our guild members, and I don't remember if this was on a comment on the actual YouTube video or not, but I think it was. And essentially, he had said, so anything that is uninterruptible, essentially keep it the way that it currently is, where like you can stop it with an AoE stop, but it'll start recasting again. But anything that is kickable, AoE stop should work the same way a kick does, where they don't recast it.
I love that.
So then you at least have a way in the game to know if they are going to recast something or not. There is problems with this though. I think the first thing that comes to mind is like if they ever brought back Azure Vault and you have the big rock guys at the beginning, that's an uninterruptible cast that needed to be stopped or your tank dies because they keep stacking up and then eventually kill your tank. You can't really do anything about that currently. It's just gonna recast if you kick it, so or stop it. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, but like, I mean, so this is the whole thing with these changes like this is that if you make that change, you would also have to rebalance some of the enemies in the game and the things that they do. Now,
Mhm.
this is the exact thing we said about the tank change, right? We said, okay, we're going to take away some of tank's self-sustainability. We're going to put a little bit of that onus on the healer. And then we're going to make adjustments to the dungeons accordingly. They didn't do that last part. And so, like, my worry here with these things is like, yes, like I think we said this at the same time when they decided Tyrannical and Fortified were going to be in the same key. Like a lot of people were freaking out about that. And what we said was, no. This means that once these two things no longer exist at the same, because they exist at the same time, they can essentially no longer exist. You don't have to balance thinking about them when you do that. You can balance independent of them, and you don't have to worry about how they interact and the differences between the weeks and things like that. But they didn't do that either. And so like this is saying something like that is like, oh yes, we bring this thing back. We allow them to stop uninterruptible things, but then they cast them again. But the big caveat on that is that they have to adjust those things or they're just going to kill people. And the thing I'm terrified about is that they're not going to do that. And so just like, I just all the stuff that I mean, all the stuff is symbiotic, right? Like every one of these things touches every other part of these things. And when you make one change to it, you have to correspond with changes to others. And I think that has been the place where, if I'm going to talk about a place where Blizzard has failed in their balancing, that has been the place that I feel like they have failed the most, is they make these adjustments and maybe they're doing them. And they're just not doing them well, so we're not seeing them. But that's what I'm saying, is I'm not seeing the corresponding adjustments on the other side when they've made these kind of changes. So any kind of solution that would require a corresponding adjustment on the other end, I'm terrified of, because if they don't make them, it's just going to result in some of the same shit we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like I said, I'm on board. I think it's a good middle ground with the suggestion of like making uninterruptible things recast if you stop it. But ultimately, I'm in the camp of just revert this fucking change and let's be done with it. Like at this point, let's like failed experiment, toss it in there with Og and get rid of it. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
But so in the interest of time, I would love to hamper on about stops again and again and again. But I think we need to get to the last point that Yoda makes here. And the last point that Yoda makes is just general class balance. And ultimately, my question to this is quite literally just like, what the fuck is going on with class balance and keys? Like I said earlier with tanks and healers, it's very clear the two best tank and healer, or the best tank and healer. It's also very clear the two best DPS at all in Mythic Plus right now is Og and Frost DK. Or in some of the high keys are actually playing on Holy DK because they fucking do this massive pull at the beginning of a dungeon and just hope that coasts them through the rest of the key. And that's a problem. And like up until hours before this patch released, it was looking like on fucking Frost DK and Arcane Mage were going to get buffed, Scott. And then hours before, they actually nerfed them. Thank fucking God, because like it just, so many questions in my head were coming up on like, do you even play this game? Do you see the level of fucking degeneracy that is Unholy DK right now? Like it is on a complete different level with how much AoE and priority damage that they can bring to both like Mythic Plus packs. Like
Yeah.
they can deal so good priority damage while also doing insane AoE. Like they are by bar none the best DPS as far as like an actual damage dealer to bring into your keys right now. It's not even close.
Yeah. So okay, let's be clear here. I can't read the minds of the developers, and I don't know what happens internally and behind the scenes. All we see is what's being reported to us and the conversations they have to us, right? But a patch comes out. WoW had released this new thing, like this patch 11.0.5 summary that just kind of like broke down in an easy chart which classes are getting buffs by about what percent, which classes are getting nerfs by about what percent, which part we're uncertain about. Enhancement shaman, because nobody knows. I had never seen them release this chart before and do this thing. So they released this chart on the eve of the patch coming in, and you are absolutely correct that they had slotted in the buff category Arcane Mage and Frost DK, and we're both getting like a 6 to 8% buff. And everyone in the world looked at that and said, "What? They're the best ones. Why?" And then the patch comes out, and after that, almost as if the developers read Wowhead, said, "Oh fuck," and nerfed those two classes. What they actually said in the post was like these were meant to be like quality of life changes to these two classes. They were just cleaning up some stuff and doing some quality of life things, and inadvertently buffed the classes. And it's just like, do y'all test things? Because like and like look, it's very very possible. Look, this is the thing we don't know. We don't know when code lock happens. We don't know what the point where they can't make changes anymore in order to hit the release date is. They could have recognized that this was a problem a week ago, but they had already hit their lock date and just couldn't make it in the patch, and then just said a week ago, okay, we're gonna hotfix it. Day of, we'll hotfix it, it'll be fine. Extremely possible that's exactly what happened. But from an outside perspective, it looks like it was in response to people noting that it was a buff, and they were like, oh shit, oops.
So I guess the other question that I have for you, though, is like, it's kind of a shit situation that we're in, because like we have so many DPS specs that are good, but keys are so punishing right now. And I think that's something that this manifesto calls out, especially when they were talking about the death timers. I think it's called out specifically in that section, that the reason, like, keys are extremely, extremely, extremely punishing, that people are literally just sitting there for, I don't know, a half hour to build the perfect group,
Yeah.
so that they can just fucking do a key and time it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the balance with Frost DK being so good, and with Og being so good right now, and them being in almost every single one of the top 50 keys, it is just like, it is pushing that meta onto the entire game, which I'll be the first one to admit. I think that if you are doing 10 keys or 11s or even 12s, and you are inviting nothing but the meta specs, what the fuck are you doing? Like, the reason that these specs are being brought to the highest content is because they are like the only specs who can deal with that content. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are the best for your key. AUG especially. AUG
Yeah.
is in general a DPS loss. A survivability gain, sure, but a DPS loss. And I think that people get way too strung up in looking at the top 50 keys rather than just accepting classes for what they are.
I mean, you're totally correct, but like, can you blame them? Like, this is the thing. Like, it's just, I have a hard time blaming these people when like it takes so long to put a pug group together, and then like you could fucking fail the key 30 seconds in or something, and then like all that was for naught. Like, I can't blame people for trying to do what they think, and maybe even erroneously think, but like what they think is the thing that's going to give them the greatest opportunity for success in the key. Like, this is what happens. This is like the meta has never mattered for the majority of people playing this game. It never matters the least right now because keys are hard. And so like, can any class do a 10? Absolutely. Absolutely. But is it equally difficult for any class to do a 10? No, it's not. And so like, I have a hard time blaming people for even mistakenly ignoring the bad classes or the less tuned classes and going for the classes that everything is telling them are the best at doing these things.
Sure.
Like can every healer heal a key? Yeah. Can anyone do it quite as good as Shaman can? No. Right? Shaman's probably still the best at it. And like we talked about, probably the easiest. So like if you're rolling the dice on a pug shaman, like that is the one where like if their skill level isn't quite up to snuff, could still probably brute force it a little bit. So why wouldn't you do that? Like, why wouldn't you do that? And so that's the situation we're in right now. And it sucks. It sucks for people that don't want to play those classes. It really does. But
Yeah.
man, I get it.
Well, I don't really know what else to say on class balance. I think that it's a double-edged sword right now, because I think that Blizzard does tend to balance more for raid. And I think that ultimately classes are relatively even right now.
Yep.
and I
Hmm.
think that it's really only becoming a problem in Mythic Plus. We talked about this a little bit earlier on
Yeah.
the show tonight, but I don't know how they fix it. I really don't. It might just be a problem that we have, but
It's the hero
to
talents, man. I'm telling you, like so many of these hero talents, especially those really great classes like Arcane Mage and Frost DK, the ability to do single target focus damage and then as a result of that doing AoE damage to everything around it is like that's what you want in Mythic Plus. Like that's exactly what you want.
well, that's
And
why
so
Shadow Priest was so good for so long.
yeah, yeah. Poor Shadow Priest.
But well, it is it's getting pretty late in our show running time, so I think we should probably move on over to the outro and the question here,
That's fair.
Scott.
That's
But
fair.
so I guess to bring us back to what we were talking about initially and what this whole thing has been about, this whole podcast, this whole day, really, it is still WoW's 20th anniversary. It is still a game that we all love and play, and is still very dear to our hearts. So my question for you guys this week is actually about the 20th anniversary stuff. Um, and I guess the question that I have is I want to know what all you're excited for that's coming with this patch. There's raid content, there's dungeon content, there's PvP content, there's open world content. There's so many things that you're able to do. I kind of want to know what you guys are excited for. Also, I want to know what transmog that you want. And please, for the love of God, don't tell me you want the Hunter Tier 2 transmog because that looks awful.
If you do want the Hunter Tier 2 transmog, please explain why.
But as always, you can contact us over at yellingintothevoidwow@gmail.com. YouTube is at Yelling Into the Void Wow, and Twitter is at Into the Void Wow.
And if you are not already subscribed, please do so. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and pretty much anywhere else podcasts can be found. And you guys did a great job of sharing the podcast. Our last 2 episodes have done very well, so we just want to thank you for that. You're doing your work. This is your job, and you need to keep doing it. Thank you, thank you for doing that.
And as always, please consider liking and subscribing, commenting on the YouTube videos. I have noticed there has been quite a few comments on our videos lately. Scott and I do try to read every single comment and reply to the ones that we can. So all of that helps us get more exposure and introduces us to new people. So please, if you enjoy what we're making here, continue commenting. Also, we love talking to you guys. So thank you for the uptick in the comments on the videos as well.
Yeah, I mean, you can talk with people good at this game all day long. It's only right here you can find the mediocre people.
But I think until next time, Scott, you and I will just be over here yelling into the void.